Hi, everyone. I'm Kristan Hawkins, and welcome to this new episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. Today, we're talking with Dr. Grazie Christie. She's a senior fellow at the Catholic Association. She writes and speaks both in Spanish and English about Catholicism, religious freedom, and the intersection of faith and science. And so I've asked her to come on today as someone who actively practices medicine. She practices radiology in the Miami area. To talk about this intersection of faith and science, because it recently came up at the Supreme Court, and I thought this is a perfect moment to have this conversation. You've probably seen Dr. Christie's work. She writes often for National Review, FoxNews.com, New York Times. She's everywhere. She's a leading expert on these issues of religious freedom and life and faith and science. So, Dr. Christie, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be on your podcast.
You wrote this fabulous op-ed a couple months ago in the National Review about what science says about the value and uniqueness of human life when human life begins. Because often when I'm on college campuses, I will have like pre-med students or nursing students try to tell me that, a zygote, an embryo, is not a human life, or that the pro-life movement believes that every time a man ejaculates, that's killing millions of babies. And it's funny, but it's also very sad because these are students who are seeking careers in the medical field. And it's not like it's rare because we see this all the time from, abortionists and other doctors. There's a infamous abortionist who she's on Twitter all the time who makes similar arguments. And it's like, you're a doctor who's literally dismembering human beings with heartbeats. How can you say it's not a human being or not remotely close to a human being? But this came up recently again at the Supreme Court. So I don't know if you listened to the oral argument. It was fascinating. I don't listen to podcasts, even though this is a podcast, but I don't ever have time to listen to audio. But I made time to listen to the entire oral arguments. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who is visibly pro-abortion in her remarks, literally asked the Solicitor General of Mississippi, how is your pro-life position anything but a religious position? This can only be a religious position when you argue for the humanity of the child. How do you respond to somebody who says that when you talk about the value of a human life, and that what is inside of a mother is a human being, that's a religious position?
Well, you're mixing up a couple of things when you ask the question. You're talking about value, and value is something that we assign according to our philosophy and the way that we value things according to how important we think they are, right? So to some people, an infant is not a valuable thing, but a toddler is. And to some people, an unborn child is not a valuable thing, but a born child is. So value is something that we assign philosophically. If we have a religion like Christianity, then we assign value to every single human being, regardless of the stage of development, regardless of their abilities, regardless of their race, regardless of their age or their health or lack of health. So that's how we assign value. We say every single human person has the same value. We're all children of God. But in the scientific arena, the scientist doesn't really assign value. The scientist simply describes the reality of the natural universe. And the reality of the natural universe when it comes to babies, when it comes to the whole process of reproduction in mammals, has been understood for a very long time. It's not under contention in any way. It's not something that anyone has any doubts about. It's a very simple thing. When a man and a woman conceive a child, that child is immediately a brand new person with its own set of DNA. That baby boy or girl starts as a single cell, but that single cell is considered scientifically alive, distinct, different from mom and dad. It has that he or she has her own or his own destiny, his or her own life, his or her own future or lack of future, if that baby isn't allowed to make it. These things are not under any kind of scientific doubt. I mean, the science has spoken. The science has been clear for as long as people have been investigating these things, which is many thousands of years. We've understood it better all the time. In my own field, I'm a radiologist, and I do fetal ultrasound. And so fetal ultrasound has added so much to our ability to place value on unborn human beings, because when we look at these images that people like me create, these beautiful ultrasound images, we're able to see that little tiny babies that are only this big have recognizably human form and features, and we're able to connect with them emotionally and philosophically and say, yes, you're a member of the human species. You're very small, you're very dependent, you're very vulnerable, you're very weak, but I can have sympathy for you, and I can feel solidarity for you because we're one of us. You're one of our species, right? So ultrasound hasn't really changed the science. What I do has opened our hearts and our minds so that we can feel solidarity as a people for unborn children. So the science is clear. We know babies that are unborn are alive and they're human, and we can choose or not to choose. We can choose or not choose as a people to assign them value. And I say that a good country like ours, which is full of good people and has a beautiful history and a glorious destiny, I really believe that about the United States. We are bigger than abortion. We are a generous, open, loving, compassionate people, and we as a people need to wrap our arms around these babies and stop excluding them from the human race the way that we have been.
That's right. It's so interesting because I think the argument we often hear conflates the value with the science. When we hear it on campuses of it's nothing, it's a blob of tissue. I'm like, well, science proves it's a blob of tissue that has unique living, growing, that's just genetically distinct. So whether or not you say that blob of tissue has value, that's really the question. But you can't say that blob of tissue or the parasite or whatever they want to call the embryo or the child in the womb isn't a human being. It's what kind of blob of tissue is it? And so that is a very, very good point. I think that's really important. What do you say though to someone who says, well, your view against abortion is just a religious view?
Oh, absolutely not. My view is not a religious view. My view is a medical view. I have patients I have patients of all ages, of all conditions. I have patients who are 92 years old and comatose, being fed through a tube. Some of those are my patients. Some of my patients are lively young men of 21 with giant muscles who were working out and they hurt their rotator cuff. Some of my patients are pregnant mothers who are in this glorious stage of their life where they are, making feet for socks, as my husband liked to say when I was pregnant. And then some of my patients are very small and they live inside their mothers and they're very dependent and they're very vulnerable. All of these people are my patients. I advocate for all my patients. I have, because of my profession, I have a desire to treat all of them very, very well, protect their lives, advance their interests. And that's how I came to this pro-life position. But most doctors are like me. There's been a big, strong push to change, medical schools and nursing schools to, politically from the top down to say, no, to politicize this. But the truth is that when people go into medicine, we go into medicine to safeguard our patients, to advance their health, to protect their interests, to be there for them, in the hardest moments of our patients' lives. There we are. We're there when, the family is too brokenhearted to be there. There we are. And we feel like that about our unborn patients too. And that is the correct way for physicians and nurses and other medical people to feel. We have to feel solidarity for all of our patients. This is not a religious issue.
There you go. That's it. That's what I have to say. Nope, it's not. When you get asked that question or someone accuses you of that. I guess the next question, this goes into that, the value part, the philosophical discussion when it comes to abortion, because so going back to the Supreme Court arguments, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, yay, Catholic woman who has lots of kids, who's has a successful career, yay, Very excited about that. She brought up the point in the oral arguments that, you know, the assertions in Roe and then in Casey that a woman needed abortion in order to have a successful career, you know, the very really anti-feminist arguments that they were making, that women weren't strong enough to become mothers and, you know, seek to fulfill these career and educational goals. Those assertions are really void because of safe haven laws, because of adoption, that a woman doesn't have to parent a child if she doesn't want to, that, you know, because of safe haven laws, she can relinquish her responsibility after the birth of her child. But since then, no one, by the way, in the mainstream media picked up on Justice Sotomayor saying that, you know, the view that human life begins at conception is merely a religious view, which is just patently false, which is you just said. No one picked that up. There wasn't any New York Times articles about that. But there's been a ton of articles in the past couple of weeks about not directly mentioning Amy Coney Barrett's remarks, but attacking adoption. I don't know if you've seen those. And it's like this concerted effort, because it was like New York Times, then Vogue, then I mean, like the memo has gone out, and yeah, and they're all like following suit, and just like they're doing right now in chemical abortion, same deal. They have a fantastic distribution network there with all these mainstream outlets. But the underlying argument for what they're making is that those mothers who choose adoption, those who've been placed with adoptive families, will suffer because an adoption plan was made. And it's really like this argument of like, well, that doesn't, you know, abortion's so much easier because with adoption, people suffer. And I think that's an important question. And I explore it a lot. It comes up probably, at every campus speech that I give, this question of suffering comes up about, you know, what should we as fellow humans, should we allow, or should we, you know, shouldn't we support the ending of life if that potential life, before they're even conceived, or the life that's already been conceived may suffer, or we feel like they're going to suffer in your life. How do you take this on from a religious and a scientific perspective, this notion of let's just eliminate the potential sufferer, not the suffering?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, it's not an either or proposition. It's not we have to kill you so you don't suffer. There is a third option. We can let you live and then help you not to suffer, right? So
it seems
when
like
people
a common
say,
sense response, but
yeah, but it really escapes people. Oh, but some children come to the world, you know, to bad situations, and then they're beaten all their lives. And I say, well, those aren't the only options. It's not death or suffering. Mm-hmm. We can save the child from death, and then try to, and we have so many resources at our disposal, so many wonderful couples wanting to adopt, people who want to take these children into their homes, and we can give them beautiful lives. So it's not an either or proposition. Another thing that's missing there is the idea of justice. It's very unjust to end someone's life because of not wanting to be pregnant, for instance. I've been pregnant several times. It's not a walk in the park. I know it's hard. I had hyperemesis of pregnancy with all 4 of my pregnancies, and sometimes I get a little nauseous and I have like a flashback, and I get really, I get very upset because I remember how sick I was for so long. So I don't minimize how difficult pregnancy is, but it's a short period in one's life, and then it's over. And then one has the beautiful satisfaction of knowing that one launched another human being into the world, even if we can't parent that child. Mm-hmm. I have an adopted child. And so for me, all this talk against adoption, it just makes my head explode. Adoption is hard. Adoption is hard. Okay? It's hard on the parents that don't get to grow up next to their child. I pray for my child's birth parents every single day. Our entire family does. And I pray that, I pray all the time that God comfort them and somehow make it known to them in the deep recesses of their hearts that their little girl is safe and that she's safe with us and we adore her. And, you know, we would lie down in front of trains for her. So that girl is safe. Adoption's hard. It's hard on my daughter to be adopted because she has that pain in her heart that she will always have, that the beginning of her life was difficult and that she doesn't know her parents that gave her life. I don't want to minimize any of that. But adoption is also a fairy tale. It's an idyllic fairy tale. Because here in my house is this perfect child who I don't know how God chose her for me. I don't know what I did to deserve it. Nothing. I know I couldn't have done anything to deserve such a thing. But here she is in our house, beloved, a beloved daughter of the house. So adoption can be hard, and at the same time, it can be beautiful. And I say, my children, I go to these marches all the time. And ever since my little girl was tiny, she would hold up the adoption is the loving option sign at the pro-life marches. And it is. Adoption is the loving option. I have a very hard time listening to the left decry adoption. That's a really bad line. Better dead than adopted is a very bad line. Let them keep saying it. They're losing people to their side every day with that, because our human hearts are bigger than that. We know that when a child needs a home and a child gets a home, the angels are singing in heaven.
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about that, because it's not like only conservative or religious families adopt. It's not like only pro-life families adopt. Now, I think I know a shockingly high number percentage-wise of pro-life families that have adopted, yes. But from the left and the right, families adopt. And so you're right. Let them just keep saying. I actually think about the LGBT lobby, and I don't want to make a comment on this, but there's been this huge push for same-sex couple adoptions in recent years. And so it's actually really interesting, because the abortion industry is so aligned with the LGBTQ lobby. I wonder how this push is affecting their donation dollars and support with that lobby. It just, they have a very interesting alliance for them to now come out and say that, better off dead than to be adopted. It's very. I
imagine for that lobby, surrogacy makes much more sense than adoption. I mean, if the babies dry up, then I don't think there's going to be so many going crying. It's sad, but these are the realities.
Yeah, no. Well, now that you brought that up, let's talk about surrogacy and IVF. We don't talk a whole lot about that in the pro-life movement. I think we're talking a lot about saving these children from the violence of abortion every day. But that definitely is something that we should talk a little bit about. I know in the Catholic Church, it is talked a little bit more because there's a theology of the body, where I know some of my own family members who are Protestant Christians. It doesn't really come up, the discussion of IVF and surrogacy. And I've actually had some really interesting conversations with people who are very much opposed to abortion. And then they'll start talking about the wonderment of IVF and the wonderment of surrogacy. And, like, oh, isn't this fantastic? Because couples who are experiencing infertility now have this way to have a child. How do you talk about IVF and surrogacy, and really what the dangers are to women and families, and not to mention the babies, the preborn humans?
I do talk about it, but I agree with you that it's a difficult topic because it's very pretty on the surface. Yeah. And it's only when you dig down a little deeper that you start seeing all the bad things that come with it. It's a little like contraception, right? Contraception seems always from the beginning, you say, well, the way it was packaged for us, they said it's a way for married couples to regulate their families. Well, we know that's not how it turned out, right? It turned out to be a way for sex to be separated from childbearing, which separated sex from marriage, which separated people from their families, which separated, it was a great separator, right?
Yeah, and now the most controversial thing I'll say on campus is, oh, if you have sex, then you should be willing to accept the natural consequence of that sex. And it's like an outrageous statement that I would dare say that. I'm like, I thought that was simple. So you're right. It just kind of just kept separating.
Contraception was the great separator. It said you will not live with the consequences of your sexual acts, right? Yep. Which is a dream of bad men from the beginning of time, right? Right. Bad men always wanted this.
Abusers. Yep.
These losers always wanted to say, okay, want to have sex. I don't want to have anything to do with whatever happens after. I want to wake up and have you be gone, like the genie in the bottle. Okay. So anyway, it's like contraception when you start talking about IVF and surrogacy, because what happens first of all is all these happy feelings of, well, no one's being hurt, and the woman wants to rent her uterus, and she feels like she really wants to give that loving gift, and then in IVF, that just seems like you're manipulating a little bit something that was going to happen anyway, and it's a kind of treatment for a disease, which is infertility. Mm-hmm. It's when you dig down a little deeper that it all goes sour. And I've had these conversations with people. On the surrogacy side, obviously, it's a kind of slavery. It's rich people renting poor women's wombs. There's a huge power differential. All the left is always worried about these power differentials, but nobody talks about surrogacy. But that's a big deal. Very often, women in Eastern Europe, for instance, rent their wombs. The babies, if they're disabled, they're rejected. The babies are
What does that mean, rejected? What does that mean?
Abandoned, not picked up. They don't belong to anyone if the babies are disabled. This happens all the time.
If the babies are diagnosed in utero?
I'm sure that the women are pressured to abort, or the women are told, hey.
You have to abort, right? You have to abort.
It's probably in some contracts you have to abort a disabled baby, or the people walk away from the baby and the parents walk away and they say, that's your problem. So the woman's the one with the anencephalic baby or whatever's wrong with the poor baby. There's also the issue of children as commodities, which is what happens in IVF and in surrogacy. We've commodified the child. So the child is something that this has seeped into our consciousness as a nation, as a culture, because it's the whole Western culture, that a child is something not that comes out of it's not the fruit of the union of the man and woman who love each other entirely and give themselves to each other in marriage. And then these children come along as these amazing blessings, that are the fruit of our love, of our spousal love. That's the way children ought to be regarded. Children now are these things that you choose to create in a natural way, if it works for you, at a certain time in your life, when everything's perfect, and when everything's perfect, all right? And then you have one or two. So that's how children are now. But what happens? Well, they don't come at the right time, because now you waited till you're 38, and they're not going to come at 38. So what happens is now you go get them with IVF. So you go buy a child, basically. You manufacture children. So you've separated, like contraception is the great separator. Mm-hmm. All these technologies are the great separator between the idea of children as blessings, as gifts from God that are given to married couples to bless their union. Yeah. Now they're commodities like Louis Vuitton purses. You can have them made in China. You can buy one on the Real. You can
choose a girl over a boy.
You can choose a girl. You check. You create all these embryos. You look at them. You test them. You discard the ones you don't like. You keep the ones you do. You freeze some of them. I mean, it's horrendous. But these things are all lower level things that you have to dig a little deeper to get at. And nobody wants to get there. No, everybody wants to think only of the happy ending. Mm-hmm. The happy ending is, and they always picture this one couple, right? Like the perfect couple in their mind. This beautiful young couple who got married and did everything right. And 8 years later, no baby. Then they're gonna go rent a womb, and everything's gonna be fabulous. They're gonna be at the birth. It's gonna be an amazing experience for everyone. It's a win-win-win, and that's just, maybe it happens like that sometimes, but that's not what surrogacy is in itself.
What happens to the embryo? So I have 2 children with cystic fibrosis, and there was Gunnar Esiason. His father was a former Boomer Esiason, big football player, and he's a commentator. So about 99% of all CF men are infertile. And so they just conceived, he and his wife conceived through IVF a child. She's due any day. And it's, been talked a lot about in the CF community, this, IVF, and how this IVF is this wonderful treatment for CF men who have sperm but lack the vas deferens to ejaculate sperm. And it's great. I'm happy that they're able to have a child. And I'm so excited that they're excited to have this baby. But then I think about what happened to the other children. And, he obviously is a carrier for cystic fibrosis, having CF. Did they screen out, i.e. discard or donate the embryos, the humans that were created? I mean, that's PGE is a big thing. That's why a lot of CF families, I remember one of the first times I went into the CF team for Gunner's visit, and I was pregnant with my second son. They made the mistake of every CF team at a hospital has a geneticist on staff, and they made the mistake of sending her into my room, and she never came back after that. But
I'd have liked to have been there.
Yeah. I was a lot nicer because it was the best hospital in the country. If it wasn't the best hospital, I wouldn't have been as nice. But, because that's kind of their prescription for parents of once you have one of those mistake children with CF, well, we can remedy that so you don't have to have another child, because that's just being cruel to allow another child to be possibly born with cystic fibrosis. Can you talk about what happens to these children in IVF?
Well, these embryos,
yeah.
Well, most of them are the ones some are frozen to be used later if they're healthy babies, if they're healthy embryos. And then what happens once they've been frozen for a while, I don't know. I suppose they're discarded at some point. Some embryos are discarded right away. They're just destroyed because their DNA is found faulty. And some are implanted all at once. They used to implant 3 or 4 and then what they would call reduce the pregnancy, which is to selectively abort the ones that, you might have 4 embryos growing inside mom, and they would go in and take out 2, the 2 that looked the least lively, I guess. And yeah, that's what happens. And this idea that they're doing for cystic fibrosis, that what people would do for cystic fibrosis, which is to have instead of just getting pregnant with your wife, to get pregnant through IVF, to create embryos through IVF and then pick out the ones that don't have cystic fibrosis. People are doing this for many other reasons that are nowhere near as complicated or intense as cystic fibrosis. They're doing this for, I know a young couple who each have a genetic, one recessive gene for an abnormality, but it's an abnormality that's very, very light. It's nothing like cystic fibrosis, and they went ahead, and a very young couple, and they went ahead and did IVF. And I don't know what kind of money they spent or how many embryos they destroyed, and they chose their one perfect little embryo and implanted that baby. She's a sweet little girl, and I'm really happy she's alive, but this is not the way to go through life choosing the next generation. I mean, we're becoming eugenicists. We're all eugenicists now.
It's like that movie Ethan Hawke did in the late 90s called Gattaca. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Seen that. You should watch it. It's this perfect society. And then, essentially, if you're not conceived in this perfect way, there's the people who are conceived in the perfect way. And then there's like the people who are like, oops, and were conceived the natural way. And they're like the lower class. It's really sad. But it's actually what we've seen. And this is exactly how we treat, any family, for example, who has more than one CF child, we get the time.
Oh, sure. They're like, how could you let this happen twice?
How could you let this happen twice? There's like, sympathy for the first having one child, but to do it again means that you're reckless. We have another child who's just been diagnosed with another very rare genetic mutation. I won like the genetic lottery over here, apparently. Something that we've never heard of. We're dealing with it. And it's not life-threatening like CF. It will cause him to not probably have substantial problems walking. And the first thing one of my husband's family members said to him was like, this is why they really need to bring back genetic tests before people get married.
Oh, before they get married, yeah.
I was like, actually, 1, it was just a blood test. It wouldn't have caught this. And 2, what a thing to say to another family member.
But this is how these young cousins of mine that did this IVF, this is how they discovered it. And it came up because my daughter got married a few months ago, and this cousin's mother, my cousin, said to me, have she and her future husband been tested for genetic diseases? And I said, no. Well, why would they be? And she goes, oh, because this is what happens. It turns out that one of them has this gene and this one. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm sure you mean really well, but the last thing I'm going to tell my daughter is to go get herself tested for genetic disease so she can go down the IVF route and picking her babies. I said, God will send them whatever God wants to send them. And whatever he sends them will be perfect. Because if it's God's plan, then it's perfect.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was, I actually didn't even mean to get into the IVF and surrogacy, but you're such a great expert to have on to talk about
I'm
this.
glad that we did. I don't talk about it much, but it's good to talk about it with someone like you.
It doesn't come up a lot, but it's definitely something we have to, as pro-life advocates, continue to kind of speak into and educate our family members even about this, because just like how I've had to educate every family member I have about birth control and Plan B, and then you get into IVF and surrogacy, it's just not talked about. And once people kind of see, oh wow, they are creating embryos, and these are human lives that are being treated as commodities. It really does start. You see the kind of the light bulb start clicking in a lot of people's minds. But we definitely have to keep raising
Kristin,
risk.
if I could say, you who work with young people, what I'm worried about in a post-Roe world, in a post-Roe America, which could be our joy to see in the summer, we could have a post-Roe America. What I'm really worried about for young people is a push to sterilize all of them. That sounds, I don't think I'm being too, I hope I don't sound crazy, but I believe there's going to be a push people are going to be encouraged to sterilize themselves. I've already seen articles about it, people choosing sterilization at 18 or 19, permanent sterilization, because they don't envision themselves having children. I can just see a world in which the left hypes up this idea that, pregnancy is a disaster. Even giving up a baby for adoption is a kind of slavery. Pregnancy is forced birth. And then saying sterilize. We're going to have to be very, I think, proactive in a post-Roe America to make sure that the culture doesn't turn into something worse than what we have now, frankly.
Wow. Thank you for bringing that up, because, we've been talking a lot about chemical abortion and how the left is going to get around post-Roe because they'll just ship abortion drugs from California to Mississippi. But we haven't talked a lot about sterilization, but you're exactly right, because I remember reading some of the tweets after the Texas heartbeat law went into effect in September. And there was people going, all right, come get your vasectomies. And they said the vasectomy numbers shot up in Texas, where men were going, well, I guess I have to go get a vasectomy. And some abortion advocates were like, good, finally, the men get the message. And but it's this treatment of our bodies like we're just like animals.
Well, pregnancy as a disease, as a terrible disease. And we're going to be very sorry in a couple decades when, the demographic pyramid is upside down, and nobody can even conceive of having a baby because they've been told since they were little that pregnancy is a disease. We have a lot of things.
Came out just recently and said the greatest threat to the human population, I think they were all waiting for him to say, was, the carbon monoxide, global warming. He said it was underpopulation, and I don't think I think he's secretly pro-life. And he has a lot of kids with various, his ex-wife and girlfriends or whatever. He likes babies, and he likes babies. He likes babies.
Yes, I did hear him say that, and he's very correct. And this whole thing, correct. A post-Roe America, it could really be an America without babies, because of chemical abortion, because of sterilization, because of an idea that the left is going to drive this idea that a pregnancy is such a disaster that it's better to be, sterilized.
You're right.
I can see some crazy leftists
out about this. I don't know if you saw it, Dr. Christie. It was it was an opinion poll of young people, and they said a majority of them said that they cannot envision themselves ever becoming a parent. They have no intention of ever becoming a parent. They need to live their best life.
If you have that feeling, you're like, oh, I could never be a parent, and then they tell you that if you get pregnant, you're going to have to be forcibly birthing this child and then giving it up for adoption. And then that's horrible because you're going to suffer all your life because of that. Then go get sterilized.
The world is going to be like going to Harry Potter land at Universal Studios. all these adult children. Like we took our kids to the Universal Studios for my son's birthday, and we were having fun. We went into the Harry Potter land, and like we found out that's where everybody in the park was at, and the lines were long, and like all these adults were like zooming in front of our kids wearing like their robes and holding their wand stick things. And my husband was like, these are adults. Like they are way worse than any of the children in this park. That's what our world will be like if no one's having
check their strollers. There's little puppies. There's dogs in their strollers. So
I do have 2 puppies. I love that. I don't put them in strollers.
I have 2 dogs I love.
But no, my gosh, that's a fantastic point. Thank you for bringing that up. We need to delve into that further as a movement, because you're absolutely right. We're going to have to talk about the value of families and the value of having children as much as we're talking about why not to violently end the life of your child. So thank you so much, Dr. Christie, for coming on today. Where can people follow you? Like I see your writings from time to time, but where can they get more like regular updates from?
Well, it was first of all, it was a real pleasure, and thank you for having me. You're charming. And we're at thecatholicassociation.org, and there you can see all the stuff we do. We have a great email list that does a roundup of all important news related to Catholicism and pro-life and everything every day. And you can follow me on Twitter. I have a lot of Twitter followers, and I put all my work on there and my ideas, and wonderful to be with you.
I'm going to follow you right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Christie. And thank you all for tuning in to this very special episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. I hope this conversation was very informative for you as you move forward in conversations about the value of life from a scientific perspective, whether you're talking about abortion or IVF. I think this conversation is going to help inform your future conversations with friends and family and those you're trying to win over to the pro-life side. So thanks for joining us.